Welcome back. All right, this week, as promised, we have another awesome guest. He is the author of many collections of short stories, such as Halloween, House of Horrors, Flowers in a Dumpster, and the upcoming Companions in Ruin. He's also the author of the novellas Fort and Asylum. Welcome to the show, Allan Gunnells.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. I'm sitting here waving like people can see me, but they can close their eyes and imagine.
Yeah. Now, I find it kind of funny that I stumbled over your name there while saying Alan, but the first time that we connected was on Facebook when you messaged me about the show, telling me how I pronounced your name correctly. Did
You did.
did I get it right this time too?
You did, and I have a bit of an unusual name. The last name definitely gets people, and it's hard for them to spell as well. But you had done an advertisement for Crystal Lake Publishing that I work with, and you mentioned my name in that bit, and you actually pronounced it correctly, and I was like, oh, somebody got it.
Well, to be honest with you, I find that the pronunciation it seems quite natural to me. But I'm the type of person who butchers names all the time too.
Well, most people want to pronounce it Gunnells,
Oh, okay.
and that just happens so much that I've just accepted it as an alternate pronunciation.
I guess it's that second N.
Hmm.
Your one thing I found really interesting about you is on your bio that's on Amazon.com. It said that it says that you love excuse me, I can't talk today. It says that you love to tell stories and have since you were a child. I was wondering what kind of stories did you tell way back then when you were a kid?
Oh, when I was a kid, maybe around 10 or so, I started writing these little one-page stories that were maybe kind of Twilight Zone knockoffs,
Hmm.
but I mean, I don't have them anymore. But I remember one specifically that I wrote about 10 years old. It was called Laura or Horror, about a pretty young popular girl who found out that she actually had a deformed, insane twin sister who'd been locked in the basement all her life.
Wow, very
But
gothic.
yes, but of course she broke out and tried to kill her sister, and all of this, which took place in one page.
Oh,
And I wrote a lot of those, and I wrote what I thought was like a novel, but was maybe like 10 pages back then, about a child millionaire that in my head I was modeling after Ricky Schroeder of Silver Spoons fame,
yeah.
who was kidnapped and had to like escape his kidnapper. So at a very young age, I was already in love with like making up stories and writing them down.
That's awesome. Did you read a lot as a kid?
I did. I read. I mean, I first started reading with stories like Alice in Wonderland and The Wonderful Wizard of Oz and things like that, because I loved that idea that just a normal kid could go to a fantastical world, and I loved anything that was sort of mysterious. I did go through a period where I was just obsessed with choose your own adventure books,
Oh yeah, I
and
remember
I
those.
did. Yeah, and in junior high, I went through a phase where I sort of fell out of reading, but then rediscovered it in high school and have never stopped.
Yeah. Is there any one writer you would say is responsible for making you into the writer you are today?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, at a very young age, Lewis Carroll and Frank Baum, with Wonderland and Oz. I mean, that really set me on the path of really wanting to explore stories. As I got older, I mean, it may be a cliched answer, but Stephen King really captured my attention.
Hmm.
And there was just something about his works that was very accessible. It was very relatable. I really felt like, I was immersed in it and I knew those characters. And that really helped me rediscover my love of storytelling and really want to work hard at getting better at telling my own stories.
Yeah. And Stephen King is a really good example of well, you said he was like a cliche to mention that, and to be honest, it kind of is amongst horror writers, but there's a reason for it because not only is he very prolific, he's also he it's not like he's garbage. There's a lot of people out there who think that Stephen King writes garbage, but that, as we all know, is not true. He writes, like, great stuff, especially
Yeah.
his older stuff.
I mean, I do. I mean, he is a truly great storyteller, and the reputation he has developed as such is well earned.
Yeah.
I mean, he does great characterization. He's um, great at pacing, and I mean, there's a lot to admire and a lot to learn from Stephen King, I think.
Yeah, very much so. Nobody really truly writes quite well in the horror field, I would say, maybe, except for maybe Joe Hill. But, uh, I would say Stephen King is sort of like Dickensian horror. And not too many people give him that tag, but I think it's definitely there.
Yeah, I definitely think he's earned his reputation. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of great horror writers out there, but I mean, Stephen King is the first one a lot of people think of for a reason.
Yeah, and he's very prolific in writing short stories. And there's a continued theory within the horror community that great horror is often best told in the short medium. As you write a lot of short stories, would you subscribe to this?
Well, I'm very passionate about the short story form. It is my favorite thing to write, and I do think. I mean, I love novels. I love to read novels. Um, and there's something to be said for telling a story on a very large canvas. But I do think, a really good short story, especially a really good horror short story, can be sort of a vicious jab, like just a really sudden punch to the gut,
Yeah,
but in a fun way. But
yeah,
but I do think when you concentrate it down into a short story, it can elevate the power of it in a way.
yeah.
And I do, Stephen King is really known, especially later in his career, for the long, kind of bloated novel.
Hmm.
But I mean, he can really still write a very well executed and very effective short story.
Oh,
And I
yes.
love that he still routinely puts out collections. And I really admire it. And I look forward to new collections by him and by, several other authors too. I do love a good short story collection.
Yeah, me too. Um, I think that horror stories. Well, there's that idea that a novel is like a period of time that changed a character, whereas the short story is like a moment that changed a person. And because horror doesn't always last like a lifetime or, a period of five
Hmm.
years, horror often comes at that one moment where like you're about to get into a car accident or somebody you love just got shot in front of you or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so that's just a moment, and I guess the healing process would go longer, but you know what I'm trying to get at. Like that moment is that kick in the gut.
Yeah, and both forms are perfectly legitimate for horror, but and I just am personally very much a fan of the short story, and I do think there's something about just that moment, as you were saying, that can be very effective, and sometimes leaving it just at that moment and not seeing the aftermath, or even sometimes because I am a fan of the ambiguous ending at times,
Hmm.
even bringing you almost to the end and then just leaving you hanging. That I think that can be very effective, and the short story form does that very well.
Hmm. So when you sit down to write excuse me, a story, do you always intend for it to be a short story, or does it sometimes, or do you just go with the flow until you figure out it's going to be a short story or perhaps a novel?
I usually, when I get an idea, can tell, like, is this a short story? Is this a novella? Is this a novel? And I don't try to force it to be any particular one. Um, so, if it feels like this is a novella, I don't try to find ways to bloat it into a novel or condense it into a short story. I just try to go with what my feeling is on how big of a canvas do I need to tell this story. So I usually know before I sit down. On occasion, I may start something I think is a novella and it becomes a novel. or I may have an idea that I think would be a novella, and then I start writing it and realize this would be better as a short story. But typically, I have a pretty good idea when I sit down to start writing it.
Are you more of a discovery writer, or do you like to plan it all out?
I am definitely more of a discovery writer. If I do any kind of outlining, and sometimes I try to do a little bit for a novel, but even then, it's very loose, it's very tentative, because my favorite part of the writing process is that moment when the story sort of takes over and tells you where it's going to go instead of the other way around.
Yeah.
So I always need that freedom to go in an unexpected direction. I don't do very well with outlines. I may have a loose outline in my head, but I mean, I've really started stories that ended up so completely different from what I originally intended that I went back and changed the title because the title no longer makes sense for the story it became after I started writing it.
Yeah. I I'm similar in that way. I find that like I've tried outlining stories myself, and like you said, for me it never really works. I find that still though I approach every story that I sit down to write differently. Do you do the same thing? Like sometimes I'll use notes, sometimes I'll use pictures, sometimes I don't use any of that. I just go for it.
I My writing process itself is usually very much the same, but I do sometimes approach the story itself differently. Like sometimes I'll have a story and I'll think this needs a more formal type writing in the language. This one needs to be very casual. This one should be written in, a certain sort of vernacular.
Hmm.
Um, so while my writing process is usually the same, I do try to think about the individual stories and what their needs are so that they're not all sounding like the same story because they may have different feels, different atmospheres, and even a different way I approach the language when I'm writing it.
Yeah. Now you've written a lot of short stories. Um, so when you sit down to create a collection of short stories or submit a collection of short stories, do you ever like with Halloween House of Horrors, do you ever like say, okay, I'm going to create a theme and then write a bunch of short stories for that theme, or do you just have so many short stories that you just like, okay, I can take this, this, and that, and stick it in my Halloween short story collection?
I basically have just hundreds and hundreds of short stories, so I don't tend to write to theme.
Hmm.
But I mean, with Halloween House of Horrors, I do have this, call it a tradition, where every October I write Halloween themed stories
Awesome.
because I love Halloween. Every October I read specifically Halloween themed books. So every October I'm writing Halloween stories, so I've amassed quite a few. And I had a short collection in the past called Dark Treats that had 5 Halloween stories,
Hmm.
but I still had tons of them. So when that particular publisher, Great Old Ones, had approached me about maybe doing a collection, I thought, why don't I just collect all these other Halloween stories I have?
Yeah.
Um, and I did a thing there where I wrote sort of a wraparound story around all the different stories, so it didn't exactly connect them, but it gave it sort of a through line. But
Yeah.
in that case, yeah, I just went through. I picked out all my Halloween stories and put them together with other collections, like recently Flowers in a Dumpster and Companions in Ruin. I basically just went through my stories, found ones I liked. Um, I sometimes like to try to for each collection to have sort of a mix of longer short stories, flash pieces, psychological horror, supernatural horror. Sometimes in some of my collections, I throw in some non-horror stories just to give sort of a range. Um, Sometimes, though, I'm not thinking thematically, but it sort of happens. With Flowers in a Dumpster, I picked the stories, I sent it, they accepted it. I went to look through it, and I just realized like I have a very high concentration of post-apocalyptic stories here,
Hmm.
which they ran with for the cover. So I didn't plan that, but I realized it happened. It happened in an earlier collection, Ghost in an Attic. Ghosts in the Attic when I looked through it once I was done and realized there's a lot of ghost stories in this one.
Yeah.
So maybe sometimes subconsciously I'm working on themes.
Maybe. But I've been reading Flowers in a Dumpster, and it's been hailed as a really great collection, and I have to agree.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
you write a lot of end of the world scenarios, and I was reading an interview where you said something really, really interesting along the lines that you wonder if people being put in extreme situations make them act differently, or if that dark stuff was always there just waiting to come out. That's a fascinating concept for me too. Can you expand on that theory, and have you come to any conclusions yet?
Well, I do wonder that because when I'm also just a big fan of post-apocalyptic stories, and when I read them or watch them in the movies or on TV, I do wonder because you inevitably have the people who just turn savage,
Hmm.
and it makes you wonder, like, did did this situation make them savage, or were they always that way, but they were just keeping it repressed because society was in place?
Yeah.
And I don't know if there are any easy answers, and maybe it's a case by case basis because I certainly do believe there are people who, if you could remove authority and they could do whatever they wanted,
Yeah.
would do whatever they wanted.
Yeah, they would have
Um,
fun. Some
and
dark fun.
I feel like, yeah, when I meet some people, I'm like, you are that person.
Yeah.
um, and then I also think they're just survival situations can bring out things in you that are not things that you would actively ever think of doing. So I guess I'm fascinated by it because I don't know that there is an easy answer for it,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure what I believe. So I sort of explore it in fiction, and I think sometimes I explore those possibilities and try to work it out there. But I haven't come to any concise or definitive answers yet.
Yeah, I think like me, you're also fascinated with the ambiguity of such situations, the mystery. Uh, for example, a story that's well written and has an ambiguous ending that leaves the reader wondering what exactly is going on, and it lingers in the mind. I just love that kind of thing because it's like those mysteries where people disappear, or groups of people disappear. I keep
Hmm.
you know wondering about that kind of stuff because it's fascinating to think of the possibilities of what happened.
I I definitely love an ambiguous ending, and I know there are some readers who are not fond of them. I have a
Yeah,
friend who hates them,
yeah,
and she's like, "Is that another one of those where you don't tell me what happened?" I'm
yeah,
like, but personally, I do think that because it's the mystery, because that does stay with you and kind of haunt you and stay on your mind, and the reader gets to play out the possibilities of what may have happened
yeah,
there.
exactly.
And I don't think that's a cop out ending, which some people can think. I think it's actually a way to really leave a powerful, lasting effect on the reader who's always questioning that in their head. I love that as a reader, and I love doing that as a writer.
Yeah, me too. I like the idea of reader participation, especially as a reader. Um, Speaking of Flowers in a Dumpster, which is published by our awesome sponsor, Crystal Lake Publishing.
Mhm.
It has been praised, as I mentioned, by many well-known authors working in horror today, including Clive Barker, Keelan Patrick Burke, Lisa Morton, and Ramsey Campbell. Now, does that ever make you want to pinch yourself?
It was rather surreal. I'm not gonna lie. Um, I mean, especially, I mean, I knew he was going to be sending it out to a lot of people to try to get blurbs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and actually, the Clive Barker blurb came from a contest I had entered where you were to write a story based on one of Clive Barker's paintings, and then Clive Barker himself read the entries and picked like a winner, and then first runner up, second runner up,
Yeah.
and um, and my story placed first runner up.
Ooh,
And I mean,
cool.
that was surreal enough. I mean, I just couldn't believe that I was going to send in a story and Clive Barker was going to look at it. I certainly never expected to place.
Yeah.
and he gave a very lovely blurb for all the stories that placed, and I got permission uh, to include part of that blurb on the book because the story appears in the book. And that was just the fact that he read something I wrote and then, liked it was
Yeah.
just amazing to me. And then when Joe over at Crystal Lake told me he was sending the manuscript to Ramsey Campbell, I mean, I've said this before in other interviews, all I could think was, Ramsey Campbell's not going to read my book. I'm like, that's insane to even think.
Yeah.
But he did, and he gave me just a lovely blurb. And I mean, it was very surreal because I mean, it wasn't that long ago where the idea that I would have any interaction with other authors, because I'm a little older, and I grew up before the internet revolution.
Mhm.
So just to know that, I mean, I'm interacting with authors, that they're reading my stuff and saying nice things about me, it is pretty surreal. It
Yeah.
makes me happy. It makes me feel kind of humbled. And, I'm certainly not getting a big head, but it is very surreal but delightful to me.
Yeah. It is an awesome experience. You recently published a novel as well. It's called Fort, correctly? Or correct?
Uh, yeah, Fort is actually a zombie novella.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that I have out through Crystal Lake, well, not Crystal Lake, Sinister Grin Publishing.
Yes.
And it's not exactly a sequel to my earlier novella Asylum, but it's set in that same universe and has a connection to it. Um,
Awesome.
and Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, can you tell us about both those books or novellas?
Well, Asylum that came out several years ago through Apex Publishing,
Mm.
and that it was born from I love watching zombie movies,
Mhm.
but I watch them, and a lot of these post-apocalyptic movies, and as a gay man myself, I
Mhm.
sometimes watch them and think, like, where are all the gay people? Do we not survive shit? Like, so I decided to do a whole zombie novella that was set in a gay nightclub with a bunch of different types of gay characters who were trapped inside with the zombies outside trying to get in. I always sort of joke that it's like Night of the Living Dead in a gay club instead of a farmhouse.
Yeah.
And it was actually very well received, and for me, sold very well. And I had this idea of doing a not a sequel, but two of the main characters in the novella were college students. So I thought, what's going on at their college?
Mhm.
So I came up with this idea about a bunch of students trapped in a dormitory, um, trying to get from the dorm to the dining hall to get food because they were running out. And I just like that idea. I do like writing stories set on college campuses for some reason, and I'm very fond of particularly writing stories set on the college campus that I went to. And I thought this would be a fun thing. I'll set it in the Fort dorm. That's the title, which has sort of a dual meaning.
Yeah.
And I just thought it would be an exciting little story. It's a very contained story of just these students trying to go on this mission to get to the dining hall and get food.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of fun with it.
That's awesome. You have another collection coming out very shortly from Sinister Grin Press. It's titled Companions in Ruin. Can you tell
Yeah,
us a little bit about this collection?
actually, the paperback and the digital just came out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
you could,
right.
yeah, you can
This
actually
was
order
from my
them.
notes actually just before
Yeah,
they came. Sorry.
yeah, but they just came out. There is a hardcover that's coming out, but it's not out yet.
Awesome.
But it is. It's a collection that I wanted to do with them. When I put together a collection, I have this tendency to want to mostly do stories that have never been published anywhere before.
Mhm.
Um, but I got to thinking, I have a lot of stories that appeared in small magazines or e-zines or little anthologies that still not very many people are going to have seen.
Yeah.
So this collection, it does have several never before published stories, but I did put a lot of the stories that have appeared in smaller magazines and anthologies before, because I thought it would be nice just to put them all together and have them in one place where people can find them.
Cool.
And I like I said, I definitely wanted to do what I always do, which is do a mixture. There's some long stories, there's some because I am a fan of flash fiction. So there's several flash pieces,
Mhm.
and I try to do a range of subjects and tones, and I think it's a nice sort of smorgasbord of my work. And they did a wonderful cover for it, which is just an image from one of the stories in there. And I'm very excited to have it out, and I hope people enjoy it.
It has a really beautiful cover as well.
Yeah, I've been very lucky with covers
Yeah.
my whole writing career, but they really did a great job with this cover, and I think it's very striking and will catch people's eye.
Yeah, book covers I like to talk about because a lot of people say, don't judge a book by its cover, but that's what we do every day. Not just with books, obviously, but especially with books. We tend to pick up the ones that are attractive and look at the back, and the ugly ones we're like, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so you have been blessed by really good covers. Like I was looking through your back catalog, and I was like, wow, these are really great covers.
I have been, and because even personally, like I try not to judge a book by its cover,
Yeah,
but that is the first impression that's going to make you stop and look at something.
exactly. Yeah.
And I've only had one experience, and I won't like name names, where I got a cover initially and really disliked it.
Mhm.
But I went to them and just explained like this cover doesn't represent the book. I think it's going to confuse people because it makes it seem like it's a different kind of book.
Yeah.
And they were actually very nice and gracious, and they did a different cover, which I thought was much more representative of the book. So, but for the most part, they just, I mean, especially the books I've had out the last year and a half or so. Every time I get a cover, I'm just like, wow, like it's kind of thrilling to see what people come up with to represent my book, and I've been very happy with what they've come up with.
Yeah. So being as prolific as you are, I'm wondering, what are you working on right now?
Well, I am working on a novella called Bookhaven, which is sort of a futuristic novella, but I'm trying not to make it like crazy flying cars, robot maids future, but a little more grounded, just everything we have now, but a little bit pushed forward. But
Yeah.
it actually involves it's sort of a mystery in a way. It's set in a future where all books are digital,
Mhm.
um, and a virus wipes out all the books,
Oh
all of
God.
the world's literature. So there's a government agency that has two purposes. One is to try to recreate the world's literature from memory,
Mhm.
and two, to seek out antique print books and obtain them. And it deals with a myth and sort of an urban legend that's developed about a book haven, which is a secret underground library full of thousands of volumes of print books. And they start to have reason to believe that maybe it's real, and they go on this hunt to find it.
Cool.
Um, and I had that idea years ago, and I just really feel now like I'm ready to do it. So I'm working on that, while I'm also working on several more short stories for another collection I want to put together for possibly next year.
Awesome. Um, Speaking of what's coming out, do you have any more releases you'd like to tell us about beyond what just came out, Companions in Ruin?
Well, Companions in Ruin is the thing I have out right now. I have several more things. Two of them I can't announce because the publisher hasn't announced.
Yeah.
Another one is a novel called The Cult of Ocasta, which is a sequel to an earlier novel called The Quarry, which will be out from Evil Jester Press. But that doesn't have an actual release date. It's just going to be later in the year.
Mhm.
So nothing, I have no, which is kind of good because I released a lot of books in a very short time period recently,
Yeah.
and I'm even sick of myself at this point. So it's kind of nice that I don't have anything immediately looming. But I mean, there's 3 books I have sold that will be coming out either later in this year or next year. But right now, it's like I had Halloween House of Horrors, Fort, Flowers in the Dumpster, and now Companions in Ruin, all within like a 5-month period.
Yeah.
So
That's got to be exhausting.
Uh, it is self promotion is hard enough,
Yeah.
and then when you have this many, and it was not planned this way. There were some delays with some publishers. Some things came out early, so I just sort of had this, which it's the kind of problem you want to have as a writer. So
Yeah.
don't think I'm complaining.
No,
It's exciting, but
it's
it is sort
awesome.
of hard to
Yeah.
find ways to promote without making everyone sick of you.
Yeah, that is a difficult balance. Have you found a way to make that balance with, 'cause some people they're like they barrage you with their books every day on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. And then there's other people more like me who don't really mention their stuff at all. So,
Yeah, you do have to find that balance because you don't want to cross the line and become obnoxious,
yeah.
but if you pull too far back, you're not reaching potential readers that you could. Um, the way I try to balance, because I do talk about my work a lot on Facebook,
Mhm.
but I also try to talk a lot about the works I love by other writers.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm just always talking about me.
Yeah.
And then I also post the random, like, social or political message, or just about what I'm doing that weekend. Like I try never to make it all about my work
Yeah.
because I have a lot of, because I know how hard it is. I have a lot of sympathy for when I see people picking on a writer because, oh, he's just posting too much. Like, yeah, maybe he is, but like I understand how hard it is.
Yeah.
So I'm sympathetic, but I definitely, there are people where I think like, okay, I know you have this book out, but like, are you reading anything, or did you see a movie? Like,
Yeah.
give me something else besides just that, because it can become very tiring for people who are following you.
Yeah.
So I do try to balance because I am a huge cheerleader for books and authors that I love.
Yeah. Me too.
So I definitely try to spread that around and tell people about the things I'm reading or the movies I'm seeing and things like that.
Yeah. And I'm a big cheerleader of my favorite authors and writers as well, and that's one reason why you're on the show. So,
Well, thank you so much.
tell me, where can people find you online if they want to get a hold of you?
Well, I'm very active on Facebook, and it's my full name, Mark Allan Gunnells. You're not going to find another one on Facebook. Um, so you can find me there. I post about, like I said, my writing, things I love, my life, everything on there. I have a Twitter account, which is at Mark A. Gunnells.
Uh-huh.
Twitter's a little more, not confusing for me, but maybe I'm too loquacious, but like that severe character limit
Yeah.
sometimes is too much for me. Um, so I do post on there. It's not my favorite medium. I have a blog, which is markgunnells.livejournal.com, which is updated semi-regularly.
Mhm.
Um, and even there, like I post a lot about my own work, but I also love to host, guest blogs from other writers, or I'll interview another writer on there.
Mhm.
So I I have that blog, and of course I have an Amazon author page where you can find all my work and silly pictures of me and things like that.
Awesome. So, I have to thank you for being on the show. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It was an honor.
And hopefully we can have you back on when you have more releases coming up.
I'll be happy to come.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, so yeah, that was awesome.
Thank you.